Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So just a sec, let me get the Bible up. Just a minute. Okay. So today we are now in 2 Samuel chapter 13. We had some very interesting discussions through 11, 12, particularly 12 last time when Sarah led the study. We had a very animated and good discussion. So I'm just hoping that, just a minute, I had to make Manu the co-host. Okay, yeah. I'm hoping that today also we will have a lot of discussion, because today's subject is something that's very relevant, especially in today's time and age. And so rather than the normal pattern where I just have these two questions and then some notes that I share after a short discussion, I'm relying more on us discussing today's subject and actually drawing out what we can learn from the passage together. So we learn together today. Well, I'll make some concluding statements, but largely I'm hoping that we will learn through our discussions, okay? So before we get in, chapter 11. In chapter 11, like we saw from 11 onwards, we are seeing David's life, right? At the peak of his power, some of his weaknesses that surface, and then the consequence of that from there on. In 11, we saw how David succumbed to the pattern of sin when he had this adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. We saw the see, desire, take pattern of sin that David fell into, where he saw Bathsheba, he desired her, he sent for her, and he took her. And as long as David's sin was unconfessed, we saw how the clutches of that sin grew stronger in his life and how it spread into all other aspects of his life. It affected the relationships he had. It affected his relationships with Uriah, with all of Bathsheba's family, actually, as we will see gradually, particularly Uriah's life. It affected his relationship with Joab. It affected how the life of some of his closest elite warriors were affected. They all had some touch of David's sin affected all their lives. And we saw that through all of that, in that concluding statement in that chapter, we saw that though we sometimes, when we are separated from God and when we fall into temptation, Hebrews 4:13 reminds us nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. So we are accountable to a God who sees everything, right? And Psalm 32:3, David himself, right? It's his psalm where he confessed that the consequences of an unconfessed sin, when he had refused to confess his sin, his whole body wasted away. His entire existence was kind of meaningless, and he groaned in pain. It's a very spiritual thing that affected his entire body and his affected his entire relationships and everything that he was supposed to stand for which God had called him. And we concluded that 11 with this lesson from Matthew 26:41, where Jesus advised his disciples to watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation, right? Because the flesh is weak and all of us are prone to fall. So when we are drawn into sin, there was a reminder from that lesson. We are drawn into sin when we are distant, when we distance ourselves from the Lord. And when we are drawn into sin, and when that sin is unconfessed, it draws you further away from the Lord. So, and then in chapter 12, last week when Sarah took that lesson, we had that very emphatic statement, you are that man. And that is what Nathan told David when God sent Nathan to confront David with his unconfessed sin, right? And when David was confronted with that sin, he was immediately repentant and he said, I have sinned against the Lord. Psalm 32 and 51 are David's public testimony to the cleansing power of the Lord's forgiving grace, right? Once his sin was confessed, David experienced the grace of the Lord, right? So when we look at 1 John 1:8-9, And we reflect on what we learned in chapter 12, we see that John 8:9, 1 John 1:8-9 tells us, if we say that we are without sin, we are deceiving ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and cleanse us from all righteousness. And we saw that happening with David in chapter 12. And in 51, so what happens when that happens, right? We saw last time, we also spoke about how there are two aspects to the sin, right? There is the internal aspect, the heart aspect, the spiritual aspect, which God can touch and cleanse, the heart that he can cleanse, and the spirit, the new spirit that he can renew within you, and how he can restore you back to the connection with the Holy Spirit, right? So Psalm 51, 10, 13 is where David speaks about this when he says, create in me a clean heart, O Lord. And he knows that it's only the Lord who can do that. And it's the Lord who can renew a right spirit within me. So it is possible, and it is possible with the Lord. And how he pleads, cast me not away from your presence. And that is what that was the pain he experienced, the fact that he felt separated from the presence and the pleasure of the Lord. And he prayed, take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation and uphold me with a free spirit. So we sing this song, right? Create in me a clean heart, O Lord, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away, and restore unto me. I forget the exact words, but it's a song that we sing so often. And that is a lesson that we had in chapter 12, that the Lord's forgiving grace frees you from sin's clutches so that you can be restored back to the Lord, and that you can obey the Lord. And in chapter 13, we will look at the other aspect of sin, the outward consequences, right? So we will see that the forgiving grace of the Lord has cleansed David's heart. It allows him to be restored to the joy of salvation, to the presence of the Lord. But it does not wipe away the consequences of David's sin. Just a minute, please. So if the forgiving grace of the Lord and the fact that he is restored back to a communion with the Lord gives him the strength to endure the consequences, however. And in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 9 and 10, we had Nathan confronting David, and the Lord tells David, why have you shown contempt for the Lord's decrees by doing evil in his sight? Before that, there are a lot of things that the Lord says, I did this for you, right? I chose you, I made you king, I sustained you against Saul, I gave you all these wives and Saul's concubines, and yet you showed contempt for me. So Nathan is now telling him, so that why have you shown contempt for the Lord's decrees by doing evil in my sight? So now the sword will never depart from your house. So he tells him, you are forgiven, but the outworking of that sin is going to remain, and it's going to go through the family, the kingdom, right? So when the Lord chose David as a shepherd king over his flock, David's mandate was to protect, as a shepherd, to protect even the weakest and the most vulnerable of his sheep. He had to bring justice through the Lord's laws for all his flock, and he had to teach his flock the paths to follow. However, we'll see in today's chapter, as an outward consequence of David's sin, how it affects all of these three things that were part of David's mandate: his ability to protect the weakest and the most vulnerable, his ability to bring justice, and his ability to teach his flock the paths to follow, right? So the first, splitting the study into two parts, right? The first, we will look at the rape of Tamar, that is verses 1 to 22. Now, it's a very deep story. It has many layers to it. We can look at it from many angles, from the angles of the various people who are involved in the story. So what I requested all of you to do was to read this portion carefully. Let's examine the story from the eyes of each person in the story, right? The key players are Absalom, there is Amnon, there is Tamar, there is David, there is Jonadab, and the anonymous attendants of Amnon. These are the people who are mentioned in the story. So let's take the study slightly different. We won't have one big question on the portion, but what we will do is we look at each of these people. Feel free to refer to verses 1 to 22. Look at each person. We will go person by person and try to look at what is the position of this person relative to the other people in the story, right? How much of power and privilege does this person have relative to the other person? For example, how much power and privilege does Amnon have? What is he representing? How much power and privilege does he have over Absalom, over David, over Jonadab, over his attendants, and over Tamar? Then we will look at the actions of each person in the story. So what does Amnon do? Next, we will look at the choices that he had, right? What are the choices Amnon makes? What are the choices he could have made? What are the results of his choices? And what are the alternate choices he could have made? And what could have been the alternate results? So we'll go step by step. Finally, we will look at it as a whole. After we examine each character, we look at it as a whole and then try to learn something from that. So I will put back this question later. Meanwhile, verses 1 to 22, let's examine each character. Okay, I will not outline the story. It's a familiar story, and I'm hoping that you've read it. If you haven't, take time to read it as we go along, right? For those who have read it, who can make observations in each of the characters. Let's start with Amnon. So the question is, look at it from Amnon's, the power he has, the privileges he has, and the responsibilities that come with that. What are his decisions and what are the actions that we know that Amnon did in this portion? What are the choices that were available to him? What are the choices he made? And also, any thoughts on the results of those choices? We'll start with Amnon. We'll go character by character. Just feel free to speak, okay? So, I mean, chat is also okay, but I'm just hoping that we can speak out so that everyone can share in the discussion more.
Amnon was the king, right? To be king.
Yes,
right?
The crown prince.
Yeah.
First in line.
Okay. So power privileges when you say he is on the topmost.
Yes.
Yeah. Because he is to be the king after David.
That's right. Sarah says Amnon was driven by lustful infatuation. He calls Tamar my brother's sister, which makes her his sister, but he's sugarcoating it. So it's a loaded word when he uses the word sister.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, Sushil, such a thought about his own sister would be so wrong, right? But
Yeah.
he's referring to it as my brother's sister.
That's right. So anybody else, any thoughts? So in his interactions with Tamar, Absalom, David, how is he using his position?
So Amnon, as it is already said, he was the firstborn. He was a crown prince, and his but from a different wife who was a Jezreelite, right? Whereas Absalom and Tamar were from I think Makkah, who was the daughter of another king. So they were also equally powerful because their grandfather was another king whom probably David married for a political alliances and all that, so that they make all those alliances through marriages, right? But see, even we look at, at least from our point of view, right? When we look at it, we even for us cousins, even third, fourth, fifth cousins, and all are brothers and sisters, right? But the way it is portrayed here, it doesn't look like David's family at least had a cordial relationship among themselves. So wife's family were probably they had their own setup running. So there was no, though David is their common father, there is no actual relationship between the other siblings. So that's what I believe, and that's where that thought also came in, right? Because the way it is written, like, my brother, he could have just said Tamar is my sister, right? Instead of that, he's trying to put it like, he is somebody else's sister kind of a thing. That's what came into my mind. That
Okay.
he's trying to rationalize, at least from a author's point of view, is trying to rationalize that, it's okay to have that kind of a thing. That's what I mean, from Ammon's point of view. I'm talking not the morality point of view, but from Ammon's point of view.
Amnon's, yeah. So does he refer to Tamar as the sister of my brother Absalom? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I've written there that, okay, I think Amnon was the heir to the throne, and I think he was just using his maybe power. He was the crown prince, and he puts this request to David. David doesn't see through anything. He just gives in to the request. Very strange, but okay. And Jonadab has actually, kind of put oil in the fire, because he's just fed this guy Amnon and his sin with ideas of how to execute it. And Tamar, I think, she really tried to convince this Amnon not to do wrong, but in vain. And it's really strange. I don't know whether you asked about the servants, but I think the servants were there, even though they were sent out, they were kind of there because they were immediately called back in after everything was over, to take her away. And, it's like, hello, what were you doing?
They were within
they were
years reach.
Yeah, they were somewhere nearby, and they were just standbyers. And I think even after she has put ashes and she's done all of that, Absalom is just very silent. He says, just be quiet. And, and why? Did he want the throne, or what was it that made him silence her? Because she was very clear, right?
Yeah.
She was silenced.
So one question, what do you think, was Amnon aware of what he was doing? That what he was doing was probably wrong? Any clues that lead you to think that he was aware?
That she was a virgin, and in those times they were protected, and he should not, right? He was in that. That is also one thing that is written.
Yes. Yeah, we see, like Santosh pointed out, Amnon is always aware that Tamar is his close relative. Though he refers to her as Absalom's sister, he knows that, and I'm sure he is aware of the law in Leviticus 18, 6 to 18, which says that any sexual relationships with close relatives is forbidden by the law of the Lord, right?
But I've read somewhere, I'm not sure how much it is, if Tamar was not a virgin, she could have been available for him to be married and all that. It's not forbidden.
See, I don't think so. Tamar actually says, right? It's not correct.
So that's because she's virgin, right?
No, the Leviticus law, the Mosaic law that bound, that was the law that Israel was bound to, clearly states that no man is to approach any close relative to have sexual relationships with her. No mention of virginity. You must not have sexual relationships with your sister, whether she's by your father's side or your mother's side. So Amnon is clearly aware of that. Second is, it's interesting that it says that she's a virgin and therefore he could not approach her. Like Suma pointed out, that seems to point to the fact that a social norm, right, where virgins were, they were protected. There wasn't a mixing allowed where a young woman could be without somebody around, be with a man where there could be an issue, right? So that is another thing. That seems to be something that the culture and the social norms of that time is also very clearly indicating to him that this is a no-go space.
And she also wants, I mean, she gives him a way out. She says, please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. So she gives him an option.
Yes. So she's also
Yeah.
pointing that out, right? Second, I also wonder, was Amnon a total fool? Surely he must have known that this is going to be discovered, right? There is no way he can hide the fact that he has raped her, sexually assaulted her. Absolutely no way. So there is this lust that is overcoming all of this. It is overcoming his knowledge of his responsibilities, overcoming everything that should have prevented him.
I'm just thinking, I mean, so would he be thinking in this way that, his father himself did a crime like this and he got away, right? David himself got away. I mean, we are not talking from a spiritual point of view. His kingship was not lost. He was still the king and all that. So probably, I'm just thinking, like, he would have also thought, like, I can also get away with, because I am the crown prince, I can get away with whatever I can.
Clearly that is there. Clearly that he feels a lack of accountability, because he feels that the person who can hold him to the account, he's seeing David as a person who will hold him to the account and not the Lord. And he feels that David's ability to hold him to account is compromised because David himself has engaged in something very similar.
And actually in verse 2, it says he made himself ill.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? What does that speak about?
I mean, it's like it's self-inflicted, right?
Yeah. It's self-inflicted, right? So it is an obsession that's festering in him, that he's not battling and he's searching for ways. And so where does that lead him to? To whose counsel does that lead him to? It leads him to, makes him vulnerable to Jonadab's counsel, right? We are told that Jonadab is a very crafty person, and it makes him vulnerable. So his ability to, he now can hear Jonadab, and he can see that Jonadab is aligning, taking him where he wants to go. All the warning, the boundaries, the fences are being dropped. And it's like Psalm 1, right? Yeah, he's listening to the counsel, he's standing that way, he's sitting with this person, with a wicked person. And so that's another thing that we see happening with Amnon, right? And when we look at the rape itself, the transformation of the way Amnon views Tamar, the result of the choices that Amnon makes. So one thing, so even when Jonadab tells him, do this, pretend to be ill, he's actually telling him that it is from David that you have to get permission. It is to David you're accountable. So there is no mention of God anywhere here. All of these people are totally oblivious to the fact that they are accountable to God. So he tells him how to deal with his accountability to David, right? And Amnon is falling in with that. So you see that secular wisdom that is coming in, that is hiding the need to know of the Lord, the accountability to the Lord, how it is acting, right? When you're in this state. And the choice he makes is he goes by that path, right? And then what happens as a result of that choice? How did he refer to Tamar before? What are the terms that he uses to refer to her and the feelings he has for her? And how does he refer to her afterwards? Initially, we are told that he loved her. He was lovesick. Seems like a very good word, right? Love. But later, we notice that as a result of lust, Tamar, the object of the target of his love, is actually not an person. He's viewing her as an object, right? An object that he can covet, that he can use, and once he's used, she is discarded. So his love turns to loathing. So that's another thing that we can see with Amnon here, right? How he views Tamar, the reality of how he's viewing Tamar. It's not as a person, not as a sister, not as someone he should protect, being the eldest brother, but as an object that he can possess and discard. Okay, so much about Amnon. What about Tamar itself? What is her position in this story?
Yeah, she appears to be weak, of course, because David, the king himself, has asked her to go, right, and help Amnon. So she has little say in that. So she has gone into do what she was asked to do. Not sure whether she has choices, but maybe she could take somebody along with her, or I don't know.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
Sushil, I think till now they've always been, and that's one of the things that he says, right? The women in the family are always accompanied, right? Especially, and the daughters, generally, the unwed daughters would be kept away from the men folk, and they have so many restrictions, right? When they do meet the men folk. And there are so many safeguards. But I think Amnon tried to escape all those safeguards, and going directly to David provided that kind of a, like the leeway that he needed, where she was as protected as she was. I can't see her in any way. I just feel so sorry for her in that she gets by the men, how she's let down by the men in her life, right? Whether it was her Amnon itself, but more David and Absalom. Somehow, yes, he does make some kind of this thing, but I feel more from David's lack of this thing. I feel how she's let down by that, and then the life that she leads afterward in Absalom's house. It just so, you just feel so miserable that one incident has changed that person's life forever.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we see Tamar is subject to two people with tremendous power, David and the crown prince. Her brother Absalom is also there, but two people are exercising a lot of their privilege and power over her. We will examine David's role next when we come to David, but Tamar she's very vulnerable. Like Sarah pointed out, culturally, virgins were sequestered, right? They were escorted. And yet here there is one who wants to break those barriers, Amnon, and he's using his power and ability to manipulate even his father to achieve that. And David, who's ignoring the warning signs, right? David also is aware of the laws. David is aware of the cultural norms and why it's there. But David is also breaking down these barriers, either because it's a lazy approach, or either because he is unable to, he feels that he cannot challenge his eldest son. Whatever way, he's just not doing what he should be doing. And Tamar is, we see how she protests, right? That I mean, she's appealing to Amnon's sense of responsibility. And she's appealing to the fact that David will also legitimize, if you want a relationship with me, appeal to David and he will legitimize it. She's doing all that she can in her power. There are people like today who might point out to Tamar and say, why did she go? She could have avoided going. Why did she enter the bedroom? Right? So you have Amnon asking her to go into the bedroom. Why did she do that? That's a normal tendency, right? We'll see this always, that the victim is always blamed. There is that questions that come into effect that try to cast some kind of a shadow on the victim, right? So, and Tamar, we will examine her a little more even later, and we'll see the consequences of what she has to experience for things that is really where she does not have that power in a very secular way if you look at it. Any other observations?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that we victimize the victim more than required. But I was just thinking, right? I mean, it's easy to bring out observations after the event, but a woman generally understands if there is something wrong in the way a person looks at the person, right? Anybody looks at you.
Yeah.
So she should also have been aware that there is something wrong in this, right? And she could, choices, right? Now, after everything, that's what I'm saying, we can always say, but she could have always told her brother, Absalom, saying that this is not right, maybe something is not correct. So can you come along, right?
Yeah, she could have. We must remember that the two people who have made a choice for her are her father and her eldest brother.
So
right? It's people who are close.
Yeah. So when your father is telling you to do something,
Yeah.
and then you're thinking like, okay, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe there's nothing wrong because he wouldn't send me into the lion's den. Right?
Yeah, I don't see any. I think Tamar is the victim here. She, as you say, I don't think there is a choice which she has. She is asked by her father to, and it can be just innocent, right? To just serve her brother. It's not like in any other way.
Yeah. Alarm bells might have been ringing in her mind and in her heart, but really she had no choice. It's a very authoritative setup culture, right? And she has to obey. So she does that. We see how she appeals to what she thinks might make a difference, but it makes no difference to what happens to her. Right?
I think she's very clear because she says, no, my brother, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. So she's very clear. So that means she has, in her mind, things are very clear. And probably she's gone there, like Arju said, very innocently, not thinking that this would happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So she is actually calling, when she says such a thing should not happen in Israel, she's actually calling to the law, to the Leviticus law. She's appealing to Amnon and pointing out that this is not something that should happen. Any other thoughts? Shall we move on to the next?
Yeah, I think I also agree with that thing because she feels she's protected by the law. So probably that's where she went there, not thinking about anything else, that such thing will not happen because it's not supposed to happen in Israel.
Yeah, and she's trying to remind Amnon of two things. One is the law and the fact that David, the king, the judge, the father, please remember David is there around. So even bringing that name up is trying to remind Amnon about that, right? And trying to jerk him to his senses. Okay, then let's look at the next person, Absalom. What is his position related to the other people in the story? How does he act? Could he have done something different?
I don't know why he kept quiet. And he told her to keep quiet also.
Absolutely.
Maybe he's waiting for David to do something, right?
He surely must have expected David to do something.
Yeah, I'm also of the thought that, because he would have thought, like, instead of doing an inquiry and all that, David would have acted. Because there are so many witnesses, all those is there. So it is not it's not like, something happened in some, secluded area or something. It was probably a common knowledge. He would have acted, but instead of that, David is trying to figure out because maybe it's because he's crown prince and all that, right? And that's where Absalom would have thought that, probably nothing may happen. So I will, that's why we see, he had that hatred in his heart. So he was, from that moment, he was plotting and planning. I know David may not do anything, but I will do something. So that's why if he would have spoken, maybe David would have stepped in and done something which would have eventually, thrown water on his plans, right? So he wanted that thing to be there. That's why he told his sister also, you keep quiet and probably I'll take care of it, don't worry.
Yeah, so He feels a sense of protection, the need to protect Tamar, right? Let's look at Absalom. We know Tamar is running away from the scene of her rape. And her hair is disheveled. She's got ashes on her head. She's ripped her robe and she's crying out and running. And that's the Tamar that Absalom runs into, or she runs to. What is Absalom's first question to her? Verse 20, her brother Absalom said to her, was Amnon your brother with you? Now this with you is a loaded word. We know what he's referring to. Did Absalom assault you? If that was his first question, what do you think? Was Absalom, why do you think that is the first question he asked?
Because seeing her, he realized, right, there was something wrong, and he would have known that she had to go and help Amnon.
But why does he think of Amnon first? Why didn't he ask, was it somebody else? Was it Jonadab?
I'm sure, in their family meetings and they're getting together, Absalom can see the kind of looks that Amnon is, directing towards his sister. And, if anybody is capable of any kind of, abuse of power, the first person that he can think of is that. And so when he sees a sister, he's just putting two and two together finally, or it feels like,
Yeah, so Absalom clearly has seen something in Amnon, the way he deals, the way he looks at his sister, the way he refers to her, whatever it is, or the opportunities that he has tried to make and failed because she was a sequestered virgin. All of that, there is this niggling suspicion in Absalom's mind. And that comes to the fore because the first thing that he points to, the first person his finger points to is Amnon. So he has noticed things going wrong, but till now he has done nothing about it, right? He has let that stay in his mind, though he's observed it. Does he feel protective about his sister?
Yes.
He does, right? Because she takes refuge in his house and it's to him that she runs. And what about Absalom? He's waiting for David to act, right? And what do you think are his views of what David is doing? How long do you think he waited for David to act? A
2
day,
years.
a month, 2 years, right? In the next portion, we'll see it is 2 years before Absalom decides to do something. So for this 2 years, he has allowed that seed of hatred for what Amnon has done to reside in his heart, to fester, to grow and blossom into something that we will examine later. So there's a lot that, and then how does he deal with Tamar itself? Does he comfort her? She must be going through, right? There is a cycle of emotions that people go through when they're sexually assaulted, of of blaming yourself, of denial, all of these things. Is Absalom catering to any of those? What is he telling her instead?
He makes it sound like it's okay. It's anyway your brother.
Yeah, he's silencing her, right? Be quiet. He's your brother. Don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Right? So he's silencing the victim here. One is probably in the interest of not smearing the reputation of the family. Probably because he's waiting for David to act on this. Probably because he has other goals and he wants to make sure he has his objective of some kind of vigilante justice that we will see later that he wants to enact, right? So that's what we see from Absalom here. The key things that stand out is, one, the fact that he did not act on his suspicions, his doubts, things that he had seen. And second, how he's silencing. He's saying, keep it in the family, right? Let's not smear the family thing. I will act on it. In some way, he would have come. I will take care of you. Don't worry. But silence. Please be quiet about it. David. What about David? What can we observe about David in all of this?
Even know what was happening around him.
Excuse me, sorry.
No. Does he even know what was happening around?
He must have. Which parent doesn't know?
Yeah.
Right?
Not everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Second, that with the request that Amnon makes, right, to him when he's ill, that didn't it sound, going by the norms, going by the fact that Tamar, society did not allow this mixing of this virgin woman with people without an escort. Did it not sound any alarm bells? Could David have done something different? Amnon claimed he wanted to eat food made by Tamar. Why couldn't David have told her, okay, I will ask Tamar to cook something and send it to you?
Yeah.
Right? There are options. Why is he unable to say no to Amnon?
He could have even asked the servants to cook food for Amnon, right? Why only Tamar? Right?
That was a direct request. Amnon says probably Tamar had this ability to make this fantastic appam and stew that was highly reputed. And he feels that that's the only thing. My appetite is down. I'm not able to eat. Perhaps that is something that I can eat. So he's appealing to that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we could have always, as you said, supplied it, right, rather than giving it. She makes it and somebody else serves it, right? David probably is in a different, probably in a different world altogether. If you look at it, he's lost touch with the ground reality, at least, of what is happening, at least within his family, because see, to run a kingdom, you need spies and people are there telling you what's happening in and around, because you don't, it's probably, it's a lonely position being there, but you get a lot of news and you are supposed to use your brains, your intelligence to come up with what is right, listening to others. So he must be aware of what is happening in and around, but he's not playing a real, he was more playing a diplomat rather than being a father. So if you see, though he probably would have taught Solomon a thing or two, but he was never a good father, at least a good father figure. He may have been a good shepherd king, but not a good father figure, that he imparted any values to his family and all that. So he just took it as a blind thing. Okay, see, when our kids, when they say something, it is a right thing for us to, try and figure out what is the intention behind it, right? It may sound innocent, but what is the intention behind it? He never bothered to do anything like that.
Yeah.
And also, once the incident is over, he was furious. But what did he do about it? He just put a carpet over it, and he, along with Absalom, they just move on. So a girl's life is destroyed. It's okay, move on. So that's the kind of attitude probably he did, and which is not right. As I said, he did not. He may have been a good king, but not a good father.
Yeah. So
David, just also, for discussion, so maybe is also this is a consequences that the God had told through Nathan.
It was a direct consequence of that thing.
Direct consequences, which I don't think. Yeah. So all the though he had the choice and all this, still maybe this was God's plan. I'm just and.
I don't know whether I would say it is God's plan. It is something that God reveals to Nathan
is always
as a consequence of what has happened.
Correct.
So that consequence, between the action that triggers this consequence and the consequence, there's a lot that happens. Psalm 32, Psalm 51 captures a lot of that. I am tempted to think that when David felt forgiven and cleansed, it was not immediately after Nathan told him, you are forgiven. The Lord's forgiven you. It's a period of time. Probably a lot of this is happening in this period of time. It's this time that David says that he was being torn apart, right? And that guilt was there, and he was just dealing with that. He needed to feel forgiven. The Lord, it was a process. He was in the process of being cleansed. Probably, I don't know. And if you look at David, right, we said that the alarm bell should have rung. But again, look at David. He's probably looking at Amnon and saying, he is my son. She is my daughter. We are all family. And I'm sending Tamar after all to him, someone whose family, the eldest brother, who's probably going to play a protective role. It's all in the family. And it's close, right? It's a close circle. It's a circle that I can trust. David himself forgot that how weak a man can be. The person he violated, Bathsheba, was also in a close circle of trust, as we saw in chapter 11, right? So that's another thing to notice. That circle of trust is where the violation is happening. And he's sending her there. Probably he's aware that there are attenders and there are other people around. So probably she'll be safe. There is no problem here.
And probably he didn't feel righteous enough to say anything because of what he's done to Bathsheba, right? Like to correct his son when he himself has done something, and everyone has seen it, right? His sons have seen it, his daughter has seen it, and then, you know, who is he to tell, right? Even if he points it out that what are you doing, you know, wouldn't some fingers point back at him, but what did you do?
Exactly. So subsequently, after the event, clearly David should have acted. Absalom also expected him to act. Tamar expected him to act. Amnon probably felt that David could not act. And David himself was subject to self-condemnation, right? Where he was probably in this place where he felt that he could not question because he would be questioned, both by Amnon as well as the people at large, right? So if Amnon is guilty of rape, let me ask another question. After today, after looking at this lesson, was David guilty of raping Bathsheba actually? Or was that a different kind of a sexual assault?
Yes, he was guilty.
Yeah, he was guilty.
Hey, though it may have been consensual, he made sure that everything falls into place. So,
yes.
So it is, yeah.
Yeah, he was also exercising his power, right? Overcoming Bathsheba's will, if she had that will to, and he was overcoming all of those fences and boundaries that Bathsheba had around her through his power and privilege. And even the Lord, actually, when he uses the analogy that Nathan offers, Bathsheba is an Eve lamb, right? A defenseless lamb. And David is this rich man who grabs her, right? So David is also guilty of rape. If he has understood Nathan's analogy, he understands that what Amnon did is much like what he himself has done, right? So that is kind of weakening his abilities to act as a father, act as a king, act as a judge, act as a teacher. Right? He cannot judge, he cannot correct, he cannot punish. Moving on to Jonadab. What do we know? What can we see about Jonadab? I know we are running short of time. Probably we will stick to only verse up till 22 this time and take the rest in the next class. So let's just go on this discussion. Jonadab.
Well, actually, if you look at it, at least from my point of view, I played both Jonadab and Amnon. Okay, so Jonadab is not any other guy. He's just your friend. So you have let me bunk the class. Okay, that thought is there in my mind. That thought is there in my mind. It is sitting there. But when I have another guy sitting there, that's when you discuss. Okay, let's bunk the class. Yeah, what's wrong in bunking the class? It's anyway a boring class. So when 2 people or 3 people come together, that idea which is there somewhere in your mind, which probably would have gone, will fester into a reality, into an action. So that's what Jonadab is always, I mean, for me, it is signifying is that, you know, an evil thought is there in my mind, but, you know, when I talk to somebody, I feel like, you know, because I may think it is wrong, but when somebody says, oh, it's not, I mean, it's okay, man. It's that gives me that confidence. And the same thing, when that guy is trying, you know, okay, you know, should I eat this or not? Hey, man, one time eating, it's okay. One time drinking is okay. You know, we're not going to make it as a habit, right? So that what happens is when I'm thinking from my point of view, it may be bad, but when somebody assures me that it is okay, it's fine, that gives me the option to do it. And that's the role what I see Jonadab playing is more about validating and giving that it's okay. It's okay to. It's not something bad. We all claim.
Sushil, I had another question on that previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think on the David thing, but yeah, Jonathan, what Santosh was saying is, yeah, that's true. One question I just wanted to check was, even though David was guilty of committing the crime or the with Bathsheba, as a parent, he still can discipline. Correct? Isn't that?
Yes, he can and he should.
Perspective that should be the ideal way.
Yeah, he can.
So, even though he was reluctant, he might have been reluctant to judge previously because of his own committed sin.
Yeah,
but I think he can and he should have done that.
Yes, he can, he should, but he didn't. That's what we can observe. So we have to read between the lines here, right? And we will reflect on this as a whole and look at it, map it to our current situations today, and see whether this is what's playing out in the world today also.
Yeah, that's correct. That was what I was coming to, because as parents, we can also be in the same situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Jonadab, anything else?
He was a cousin and an advisor, so he should have given wise advice.
Yes. See, he is a person who's part of the family. He's the inner circle. And if he's an advisor, he's probably older than Absalom and Amnon. He's seen as someone who can advise, right? Because he asks Amnon what is wrong, and Amnon confides in him. So you see his position, right? And what is Jonadab doing here? Much later, we will see he's aware of the whole thing, right? He's the one who's actually reading the situation. And he is manipulating the situation.
Yeah, he schemed the whole thing. Probably Amnon wouldn't have even done it if it weren't for him.
Amnon wouldn't have done it if, he was in a place where he could have actually dammed the stream and deviated the direction, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Right?
He got courage because of Jonadab.
Yeah, but I mean, let's look at it from a future thing. Okay, let's say like Amnon doesn't die, and he becomes a king of Israel. Then who's the second most powerful guy in the kingdom? It's going to be Jonadab, right? So it will always be better that I, give advices which is suitable to the future king rather than which is suitable to the society, right? I'm more trying to satisfy the king than the kingdom.
Yeah. So he's someone who's very aware of situations, and he is outside of it and being able to view the situation from outside, and he's manipulating things, right? We see that he's aware of why Absalom kills Amnon, and he is the one who goes and tells David, right? So he's there. He is in a position where he's always a person who seems to be seeing the situation from outside, who could influence it, while the others are caught in the stream because of their weaknesses and their self-doubt and all of that. Jonadab is outside, and he's actually directing the stream of events.
Yeah, but as just now we just heard, right? So he is also trying to maybe do it for his benefit, right? Amnon is the next king, and he can also get a lot of brownie points by doing this in this manner.
Yes. And let's look at it this way. So how does he advise Amnon, right? He's clearly advising Amnon. We are told that Amnon felt but Tamar was unreachable because she was a virgin, which meant that the social norms prevented him from getting into a position where he could actually engage in a sexual relationship with her. And what is Amnon actually telling him? How to break those boundaries, right? It's almost like, Jonadab telling Amnon, he's giving him a plan which will allow him to break those barriers that the social norms have erected. How he can get Tamar into his room. So underlying this, can we see Jonadab's view of the world? What you feel is probably not wrong. Indulge. It cannot be wrong if it feels so right. right? Can we see that happening? He's also part of the inner circle, and he has a different view of the world, right? He's not even being bothered by the law, by the sheer wrongness of what Amnon is considering. He's working at the level of an.
He's also mentioned as a crafty man, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So very worldly, right? Very worldly. He's probably very secular wisdom and very crafty. And he's also moving along, right? We'll see how he moves along on different sides of the boundaries of this play that's happening. Amnon's attendants, those anonymous guys who were there, what about them?
Nothing much. They're just observers and obedient people.
Yeah.
They are silent spectators of anything that is happening.
Yeah. So there is a power equation here also, right? They are under authority of Amnon. So they are silent. So we have a set of silent, anonymous attendants, nobody who has the courage to stand up. They are within years, like how Minnie had pointed out earlier, they are within years reach. Amnon can call out and the attendant can step in. So if Tamar had the presence of mind to scream out, they were within years reach. It is totally unprecedented when Amnon asked them to get out and close the door. They are clearly seeing this disregard that Amnon has for Tamar. In none of this, we are told that anybody acted on this. So they're all bystanders. They're subject to power, but nobody's conscience is waking up. Nobody is willing to stand up for Tamar. Nobody is willing to stand up for the risk she's entering and for what seems to have happened to her subsequently, right? So when we look at all of this, because we're running short of time, let's just come to that final question. What we have seen, this cast of characters, the context in which this rape is happening, is it similar to what happens in current culture? And how do we respond? Right? Clearly, we have seen that sexual abuse, rape takes place in an ecosystem, and nexus of players have to come together for it to happen. Right? We see that who are the nexus of players? There is the victim. Victims we see from today's lesson are exploited by usually people in their own known circles. Statistics say 90% of sexual abuse happens within closed circles, very often the family, where the power and privilege over the victim can be exercised by the abuser. So Amnon, the crown prince, he was privileged in David's eyes as his successor and in the people's eyes, right? He was the elder brother in his relationship. He had authority of Tamar as the oldest brother. So the victim Tamar is exploited by people in their own known circles who exploit their position of power and privilege. Second, we see how Amnon referred to Tamar continuously as my sister, my sister. It's lowering the defenses, both of Tamar, of David, and everyone concerned, right? Even Jonadab, he never refers to her as just someone I'm lusting after, right? For a sexual encounter. So he's grooming the victim. This also happens very often, right? Abusers, abuse is never a here and there thing. There is a progression during which all the people in the context are groomed, just as the victim is groomed to enter into a trust relationship that will lower the barriers. But we see what's actually happening. To the abuser, the victim is not a person, but an object to be used and discarded, right? So Tamar is someone to whom Amnon wishes to do something to her, not for her. So that's what we see here. Then we see in an ecosystem of abuse, there are a bunch of people who ignore the warning signs. David, the father, has ignored the warning signs. He's not using his discernment. He's not exercising his authority to suggest alternatives. Absalom, the brother, we see probably saw the danger signs, but he did nothing to prevent it, right? So when this is happening in your known circles, there are people who will see and who quietens their conscience, who quietens it and say, oh, this cannot happen. Or or how do I call someone out? Then this crafty people who step into the gap to tempt the perpetrator, who bring secular wisdom into the equation to make the perpetrator, someone who's tethering on the edge, who's on the borderline, to step over the threshold, right? So people like Jonadab, who can cater to the people of privilege, either knowingly or by unwillingly not questioning the privilege, right? Who will use secular wisdom to normalize what is happening and to give them just that extra thing which will allow them to quieten their conscience, right? Who can even arrange situations sometimes. And then there are people who silence the victims. And all of this happens first in the family, first in the close circle, right? So Absalom tells his sister, silence my sister, he's your brother, don't take it seriously. All the while in his heart, that hatred is brewing. So even when you silence the victim of a sexual abuse, it is not that you can view the abuser in a normal light any longer. That hatred, remember, your heart also needs healing from that. Hatred has been sown in your heart, and that will show up sometime, somewhere, some way. And then the people who ignore the abuse, rape, turn their faces away, even when they see what is happening. The anonymous attenders who obeyed Amnon. David was very angry but did nothing. In a way, he knew what happened, but he has done nothing, which allows that hatred which is in Absalom's heart to fester and blossom into murder, which we will see in the next portion. We don't have time for that, so we will not go there. So, and then there is the victim itself, the set of people. In all of this, Tamar needed counseling. She needed support. She is going to go through a whole cycle of emotions. We are told that her physical needs were probably met by Absalom. But what about her spiritual need, her emotional need? We are told that her life was desolate in many ways, right? She is barren, she remains unmarried, and we do not know, right? Her heart, her condemnation, her self-condemnation, probably. She's probably blaming herself. She's just left there, right? There's no one who's really caring for Tamar, the person. And David, like I already mentioned this, was very angry but did nothing. He did nothing to bring justice. He did nothing for Tamar. He was her father. He does not even cater to all these needs that he spoke about. He did nothing to bring justice. He did nothing to punish Amnon, who did wrong, and he does nothing in his role. He is abdicating his role as teacher, father, judge, which allows Absalom to begin to view him in a light which is not very healthy. And we'll see the outworking of that later. And what about Absalom, who sheltered her but silenced her? He allowed her life. He's not seeing her life beyond her physical needs for a shelter. He's not seeing the desolation that her life is going into. So, and what are the consequences of all of this? We see that sexual abuse, rape happens in an ecosystem, and there's a nexus of players have to come together. And in the process, the image of God, a human being, a Tamar, is devalued and shattered, right? Tamar is a life that's not valued. We see broken families. We see seeds of hatred that result in families being torn apart. We see broken models. People who should have modeled the love of Christ is abdicating that role. Instead, we have secular norms being enforced, right? That David is, after all, one more just like the rest of us. He is no different. So these are some of the consequences. I think we run out of time, so we will stop here. We will take the next lesson, the next part next time. Okay? Is this an okay place to stop?
But the root cause remains same. What is the larger picture, the root cause of all this? When we look at that, it is basically sin.
Absolutely.
And I think these are all the consequences.
Yes.
But
To Jesus, like, right?
Mm.
He led a perfect life, and we have that hope.
Absolutely. The Bible speaks to both ends of the problem, right? When 1 John 1:9 talks about confessing your sin, it speaks about the corrective theology, right? After the sin is committed, how the Lord can address it. And Romans 6:12-13 speaks about preventive theology, how you can actually deal with your body, with yourself, so that you do not allow your body to lead you into sin, but to submit your bodies, submit all of you to Christ, so that you can become instruments to be used for righteousness. We will look at that next lesson.
Yeah, that's very good.
But the question that Vineet was raising, right? Vineet saying that shouldn't David as a father should have corrected? Okay, and then that applies to our lives, right? We may not be, I mean, sinless, or
Yeah.
our lives may not be a full model for our children.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I was also alluding to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's very clear, and I was just thinking, when Vineet leads us in this concert of prayer in the beginning, today you were saying, right, we are not of the world, but in this world. So one is the recognition that we should, a reminder that we are not of the world, but a caution that we are in the world. And every time when he prays, he leads us to think that as parents, we have to model, we have to be role models, and we are weak. So pray for strength. In our service, right, if you have noticed in our intercessory prayers, we all read that prayer. How much do we take it to heart when we pray for our leaders of our nations, when we pray for the leaders of our church? We pray for the CSI church moderator, the CNI moderator, for our bishops. We pray for our priests, for the deacons. So leaders also need prayer.
Yeah.
Just as the led need prayer.
No, so in this context, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying the possibility of this murder, we might not create a physical murder, but we can ruin through jealousy, through anger, through hatred. We can still keep it up, right? That's the other part of.
Yeah. In the New Testament, Jesus raised the bar, right? So anger itself is committing murder, and thought itself, right?
Yeah. So the depth of what we can go is really deep.
Yes.
Yeah, so just to conclude on what Vineet, you were saying, right? So I was also reading something around this, and I was also thinking about, like, we are not blameless or faultless. So the closest that our lives can be seen is by our children and our family, right? And if we try to correct them, they can come back and say that, oh, you also don't do this, right? So should I be able to correct, similar to what David and Amnon's case is here. So when I was reading, the answer to that came as, right, your life is not blameless or thing, but that does not mean that you are the role model for your children. You are also sinning. So it is, the role model is actually in the Bible, right? So your standard should be the Bible. So you are also trying to improve your life based on the teachings, and you're also helping your children. So you should not be quiet even if you think you are not fully correct. That's what was the answer given.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I think we are not perfect, and we are also committing the same thing, but that doesn't stop us from disciplining. But I think the key thing is, as you rightly said, we have to bring Christ into the fray, God into the equation. In our marriage vows, we say that unless God is the third agent, I think then it will never work out. So I think in the same way, unless we bring Christ and God into the equation and teach, I mean, we equally depend on Him, all of us, irrespective of who we are. We definitely intentionally depend on God. I don't think it's impossible like this.
Yeah, we will step into a lot of this discussion next week also, when we read the rest of the story. So it'll be nice if we can just hold some of the thoughts. So just to wind up for today, is just a reminder that something like rape and sexual abuse, like let's not take our mind away from that. That's the problem we're dealing with. It's a very current issue. It happens in an ecosystem of players. It happens in closed circles. So it happens where there's an Amnon, an Absalom, a David, a Jonadab, where there are anonymous bystanders. It happens in families. So this is speaking about us. It's all our context. It's not speaking about somebody else whom you read about in the news. So that's just a reminder, and that we all have a role to play. Is just a reminder I want to leave you with today. It's an abrupt end because we have not completed the entire study.
Yeah.
Okay, Manu.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you. Over to Evan for the closing prayer.